I am a product designer at SoundCloud. I currently am working on what's called the monetization team. I have previously worked with several different companies, including Bedrocket, which is a small media startup. I worked for NASDAQ OMX and also another small startup called Parks by Nature Network. I also do game art and programming, and I also organize events, and I also organize Code Liberation, which is a foundation that teaches women to program video games. So I do a lot of stuff surrounding art, design, and programming. And I also do comics, so throughout this you're going to see a bunch of really random, adorable images. Prepare for that. So as I mentioned, we're going to talk about why collaboration is important during the design process, different ways to collaborate on design throughout the process, also ways to cross silos that are created by traditional teams, and a little bit about getting the higher-ups on board, because obviously this is pretty important. So I guess let's sort of jump in. So as I mentioned earlier, I'm going to be talking about this a lot from the designer-developer perspective, but this can also be applied in some cases to other roles, and certain people from other roles can also be included. So don't feel free to experiment with anything I say and actually create your own processes as well. So first off, I have a question. How many of you own 4 or more devices? You can raise your hand. Awesome, yeah, so this is really, really important, right? They're really important to us. We consume a lot of content across different devices, right? And this is actually, you are all part of this statistic, so congratulations. Americans on average now own 4 devices and spend 60 hours per week consuming content across these different devices. And what that means is that we have a lot more work to do across all these different devices to make sure that everyone has a really consistent experience. And one way to really do that is to make sure that everyone is on the same page at all times. But how do you do that? So the problem is here, we need to be more efficient, we need to all sort of work on these different things, and we need to know what's happening at all times. And a great way to do that is by having everyone contribute to the product design. And this is why I titled this, We're All Designers, because at the end of the day, yes, the user experience or product designer is going to be the one who sort of facilitates that experience design, but in reality, we all contribute in our different ways to making sure the product works well and is usable. So again, why is collaborative design important? Well, number one, UX designers obviously are finding problems, and they're trying to find the right problems and create or figure out the right solutions to those problems. So if more people are actually sharing their ideas about possible solutions, that means that we can arrive at the best one faster, most likely, hopefully. Next is also there's more communication happening, and hopefully it's improved. Actually, when I was working at Bedrocket, a common problem was that the design team had one set of terminology and the development team had another set of terminology. So for example, the developers would talk about endpoints and the designers would be like, what the heck is an endpoint and how do I use it? So we had all these kinds of different cases where we were trying to communicate with each other, but we used things in different ways, and in some cases we had no idea what anyone was saying. So when you're actually collaborating on these things, you sort of get to explain what the terminology means and form your own shared form of terminology. The other great thing is that everyone's on the same page about planning, and everyone understands why design decisions were made. So the other great thing is quicker production. So this is the usual process when I was working at Bedrocket, for example. We had a kickoff stage, we had research and design, then after the design was somewhat perfected, we went and had a design review, and then this would be where the director of product or chief of product would go and we would present to him and we would say, what do you think? He'd provide all his feedback, we'd go back, we would modify the designs as much as we could until we thought it was still good, and then we would go and review again, and then we'd get more feedback, and then we would go and do that again, and the review would happen. We would then actually take what we thought was good at that time and bring it to the development team, and they would also say, this is not feasible, or we don't have the structure to do this right now. So once we got feedback from them about what was and was not possible, we would revise the designs again. So we had a lot of back and forth, and over time we realized, the tech team or the development team really found that we kept surprising them, and they got really frustrated, and we were really frustrated because we kept sort of reworking our stuff without actually asking them what was possible. So once we would have like a final tech review, they would go into sprint, and then we would all spend time QAing, and then we launch together. So by doing collaborative design, working together and sort of checking in at all the points of the process, you can sort of reduce that to something more like this, where during the design process, you're constantly going back and forth and saying, hey, is this something we can do? And also including them during the design sprint, so that you then, instead of having like the different types of review, you all sort of come together and you do testing, you review with each other and say, you know, does this work? If not, then let's go back and try again, review again, and then once you sort of figure something out, whether that be like a prototype or anything like that, then you can sort of go and the dev team can sort of finish it and make it real. And then you can all, again, QA and launch. So this is something we started moving toward with Bedrocket, but I found also that at SoundCloud we do a lot of awesome stuff. So I'm going to also, throughout this talk, sort of mention some of the things that SoundCloud does great and some other things that I've seen throughout while working at other places. So some of the things I'm going to mention, as I said previously, might not work. Some things I found would work at some places but wouldn't work at other places. It's all about really making sure that your culture is right for what you're going to try. And obviously, you know, try it really quickly, and if it doesn't work, then try something different. So sketching exercises are awesome, and you can do them at any scale. They can be really large, full-scale things. They can be like an hour or two long. You can do a design studio, or you can do a really quick thing depending on like the size of the feature. So at SoundCloud, we kind of like, we sort of design and develop pretty quickly. So I actually work on what's called an end-to-end team, and I'll talk about this a little bit more later, but we do a lot of sketching exercises just to figure out, you know, if we're on the same page with what we're working on, and to make sure that we know the direction that this is going to go in. So this is a really great thing you can do with product managers, with designers, programmers of different kinds. Just get everyone in a room and sort of state the problem that you're trying to solve, and then everyone can sort of sketch out different solutions. And so this is an example from an internal tool that I designed at SoundCloud. And basically, it's an announcement generator where it's like a little tiny 300 by 250 box, but we needed to figure out the best way for people to actually be able to generate these really quickly. It was me, and it was one of the front-end engineers, and we sat down together for about 5 or 10 minutes. We just sketched something out really quickly after I gave him the problem, and it turned out that we both had similar ideas. So that was awesome. We were on the same page, and we sort of, you know, sketched it out and made sure on paper that we both knew what we were talking about and that we were going in the right direction. So it's great even at a small scale for figuring out, is everyone on the same page? And then the other awesome thing is, if it's a more large-scale thing with lots of people, you can actually hear really important things you might not have thought about. So for example, when I was at Bedrocket, we were designing a pretty important feature for our content management system. And I actually gathered, it was me, it was some front-end engineers, some back-end engineers, a product manager, and we all sat in a room for about an hour. And for the first about, I would say, 10 minutes, we did some sketching. Obviously, first I identified the problem. I actually created like a little printout that had the problem written out, I think the problem that I wrote out was our editors need to restrict a certain amount of actions that a person can do. So like, what is the best way to do something like that? And then I just sort of said, here you go, have 10 minutes and sketch out everything you can think of. Doesn't matter how terrible you are at drawing, just do it. Just draw some circles and squares and get it done with. And so by the end of that, we started doing critiques and presentations, and it was really awesome because the engineers said a bunch of things we would have never thought of. They told us a bunch of technical restrictions and things that we can and can't do. So that was really cool, and everyone sort of shared their different opinions from different points of view, and we all found out a lot, and then we went and we combined those ideas and created a solid core design direction. So again, moving back to the announcement generator, I was able to take those sketches and then actually create a prototype, And then I brought that back and said, hey, do you think this is going in the right direction? Is this what we originally talked about? And everyone said, yeah, this is possible, and this is exactly what we were thinking of doing. And then I went and I tested it on an actual person who was going to be using this, and they also said it was really straightforward and easy to use. And I just sort of let them go through it and have fun, and they really liked it. So yeah, this was great, and sketching is awesome, so try doing it as much as you possibly can. The other great thing is, reduce documentation. If everyone is sort of involved in the initial part where you're defining the design direction, there's not really going to be any surprises, and you're going to know what to actually do because you were there when the idea was created. So super great idea also for that, just letting everyone know what the direction of the product is going to be or the feature makes it a lot easier when the time comes to actually build it. Next is designing with code. So as I said, I'm a super huge fan of programming, and I love doing it as much as possible, and I hope that in the future more designers, I think we're getting to a point where people understand this now, which is awesome, because this has been a thing for a while, but designing with code is really important, especially because as designers we need to know, the medium that we're working for. One of the reasons I really like designing with code is because you can really figure out the visual and interaction design. And this was actually going to be a really cool animated GIF. But basically what happens here is when you hover over this little link that says other sites, the arrow actually starts pointing downward, and it sort of bounces to tell you hey, this is actually going to shift down when you press it. And then you actually press the button and the whole top part shifts down. So the idea was that this would be a global navigation. So I did a prototype for what the global navigation could become, and then it was really easy to sort of share that with people and get their feedback, and then figure out, should we go in this direction or should we go in a different direction? And this was something I could do really, really quickly with enough experience. So it's really awesome for figuring out not just how it's going to look, but also how it's going to feel, and how does this actually tell people what to do. So ideally, it would be great if designers could use what their team is using, and that's because, or rather what the development team is using if you're not on an end-to-end team. So basically, when I was working at Bedrocket, I used AngularJS, and that was because they were using AngularJS, and that really helped me to understand how long things took to produce, how hard something was to create, and sort of the other restrictions or constraints that the dev team actually had. But so for example, if you were on a team that was creating things for iOS, it would probably be a great idea to learn a little bit at least about Swift. If you were using React, or if your team's using React, it's a good idea to try and learn React, at least a tiny bit of it. Same for Meteor or anything else. We actually have a designer at SoundCloud who creates really, really realistic prototypes in C#, actually, I think, Objective-C, for our iOS app. So it's really cool to just be able to go to that next level, and it really improves your interaction design skills as well. But if you can't do that, because it can be really scary and really hard to do sometimes, you can also just use whatever works for you. The really important thing is sort of just creating something that goes beyond just the visual design of it. So for example, you can just work in straight up HTML5 and CSS3, or you can try using InVision, which is also another great piece of prototyping software. Or you can use Framer Studio, which is really great and I believe works with CoffeeScript. So pretty easy to learn, and we actually had a learning session at SoundCloud about how it works, and it was pretty straightforward and fun, so super awesome thing. And you can also use something like Proto.io, and there's a ton of other ones out there. And even if you don't think you want to code, there's actually solutions that you can do with paper sketches. So there are endless amounts of prototyping options available, but definitely recommended use what your team's using. Again, the reason for this is because reduced documentation. When you actually work with the code that or if you work in the framework that your team is using, you actually can just sort of send them the prototype and say, hey, just check it out, click around, and then actually they can just look in the code and possibly copy and paste some things. So for example, I worked on another internal tool, and all I had to do was I actually worked on the same repo because it was small enough. So they just said, hey, create a different branch, do a pull request, and then just let us know. And so they went in afterward, and they just sort of looked through the code, accepted the portions, accepted some of it, and then went in and made some more changes, and then pushed it live. So it's really cool because the designer can feel like they're directly contributing. They can learn a lot about the development process and work, and the developers kind of get to know what's going on because they can just sort of look through the code and see how things work instead of having to look through an annotated prototype. So I really like working in code, and I find it fun. Some people actually require, or they need a little bit more. So when I worked with a certain person at SoundCloud, for example, they were kind of used to working with a more visual designer who would send them comps. So what I did was I just started screenshotting things and adding them to the stories that we worked on so that it was really easy for them to also have a visual reference. So sometimes you also have to make those kinds of workarounds. The other thing is designer-developer pairing. And again, I love this. I'm really excited about all of this. So I am a big fan of just sort of lending each other skills and learning from each other. So I think that having time for designers and developers to work together is really important. And that's because we have a lot to learn from each other, right? I find that a lot of developers are really interested in learning more about design, and they would love to sort of have someone to show them why things are important, why thinking in certain ways is so important. And a lot of designers also are really curious about the other side of the process, what it's like to work on a programming team, what that crunch at 1 a.m. is like, why they use certain frameworks and how they think about things. So by working together, you can learn a lot about each other, about the way each team works, and then that can also lead again to starting to actually have the designers create their own prototypes. And this was another really cool GIF. So I actually, when I was working on we actually have a new initiative called Advertising with SoundCloud, and we also have one called On SoundCloud. And so I was working on the mobile site as well as the main design for the site. And what I did was I actually created a prototype of the design that we had agreed on, and then I actually made it responsive, so I started squishing it around, and that was awesome. And so this is a really cool way by working with people and sort of creating, you can work with programmers and create prototypes, or you can work by yourself and create prototypes and share them with people. You can sort of see those designs come to life, and it's a really awesome feeling when you see something you worked on actually be a live thing. So I'd highly suggest it, and I actually, after we sort of agreed on a direction, went and kept working with the front-end developer for the tiny little nitpicky things, and we worked together a lot on that, and that was really cool. So yeah, highly suggested just pairing with people. And it also allows you to do really quick usability testing. So additionally, again, reduce documentation, partially because in this case it's already been built. So just sort of having the programmers there during the whole process of creating the design kind of helps, because then by the end of it, they know what's been built. They've actually built at least most of it already, so then they can just kind of finish it up if anything else is necessary, and then that can be shipped. So ways to cross silos. Silos they kind of suck, and I've experienced many of them, being completely honest, throughout the years. And so I've come up with a couple of different ways, or I found rather a couple of different ways that work for different teams. And again, this is super important. You're gonna have to test a lot of things. Some things may work, some things may not. It goes back to the culture of your team and who feels what way about certain ways of working. So if you have a team that's very open to trying new things, or a manager that's very open to trying new things, then you may find that it's easier to sort of test stuff out. But if you don't, then you might have to actually just kind of sneak around and do it anyway. So easiest way, just kind of ask people if they want to, participate in things, invite people to certain meetings, say, hey, do you want to participate in this design exercise? Or if you're on the other side and you're a programmer and you want to participate, or a PM or whoever, just say, hey, I would like to participate in this thing. Do you think I can do that? And hopefully they will say sure. There will be some cases in which people are kind of no, but hopefully they will be awesome and say yes. And another great way to do this actually via involvement is to sort of have an open meeting policy for certain things. Like if they're design-related things, it might be a great idea to sort of say, hey, anyone can come to this design meeting, and then sort of set rules about how people can communicate regarding designs and give feedback. Speaking of feedback, it's really great when people sort of just walk over and say, hey, can you let me know what you think of this? And this can happen for designers or programmers or anyone else in between. I have people all the time who are programmers come over to me and just say, hey, would you like to check this out and see what you think of it? And I say, yeah, and then I try it out, and I usually end up squealing because I think it's awesome. And the same thing usually happens when I ask people if they want to try my stuff out. And you can do this in lots of ways as well. It can be a really informal thing, where you can like have something over a chat system. You can actually also do really quick usability testing and things like that. So there's lots of ways to get feedback. And chats. Chats are very important. I also did a quick plug because I'm cheesy. So a great way to sort of encourage people to talk with each other and sort of cross-pollinate is to have a chat system that really encourages that. So I highly suggest either Slack or HipChat. Both of those are really, really awesome for sharing files and sharing links and things like that. And in the case of Slack, actually in both cases, they actually show the images or the GIFs of whatever you've shared in the chat, so you can sort of give really quick feedback. So this is really great for designers and programmers to sort of work with each other really fast and sort of give feedback on the fly. As I mentioned earlier, end-to-end teams. At SoundCloud, we actually do what's called end-to-end, which people have also referred to as squads. Each team is self-sufficient, and this is really important because we actually have 3 different offices, I believe, 4. We have 4 offices. We have a Berlin office, we have a London office, a New York, and a San Francisco office. And so with all of these different teams across these different places, it would be impossible if we were not co-located. So for example, the monetization team is the one I am on, and it is me as a designer, and then we have a couple of engineers, front and back end, and we have our product manager, and we all kind of work together autonomously, so we can actually create our own stuff without having to worry or rely on anyone else, as long as the API is done. And really quickly, getting management on board. It's really tough sometimes to sort of let people, or get people to say, okay, this is a good thing. And so one way of doing that, which unfortunately has worked in some cases and has not worked in other cases, it really, again, depends on the type of manager or boss that you're working with. One way is to just sort of say, hey, I saw this thing online and I think this would be really cool for us to try. And in some cases, they'll say yes. And in other cases, they will ask you to write a proposal. In the case that they ask you to write a proposal, I wish you luck. I actually spent about 3 hours one time doing lots of research, watching lots of talks, and just seeing wow, these things really work. And then I wrote a proposal about it, and I sent it to my manager, and they were just like, I don't think we can do that right now. So if that happens to you, then just do it. Just try it out, and just hope that it works well. And if it doesn't, then just don't ever talk about it again. But if it does work, then just let them know. Say, hey, I tried this sketching exercise and it was awesome, and it was great. And then they'll probably be like, yeah, maybe we can do that again. Or they'll say nothing, and then you try it again anyway. So yeah, just try stuff and don't worry about whether they don't like it. As long as it's not an abysmal failure, which it probably won't be, you'll be fine. So in summary, collaborative design is awesome. It makes teams more efficient, and it makes them way better at communication. It also makes them much more autonomous, and it makes people feel like they have serious agency in your product. There's never going to be a one-size-fits-all solution, so you're going to have to figure out ways to compromise and modify things until you find what works for you. You're going to have to do a lot of asking, no matter who you are on the team, whatever your role. That doesn't mean you can't do one of these things. Just sort of ask and try. And take initiative and apologize later, because sometimes things don't sound good in the form of a proposal. Thank you.